The office of Mr. Dawson was exactly as I remembered it. Standard chairs, a heavy wooden desk, and some legal papers scattered around. There was nothing special about the space, but it had an importance that couldn't be ignored today. It was the place where the will of our great-aunt would be read. I entered, my shoes clicking against the tile floor. I was the first to arrive, and I took a moment to breathe in deeply, trying to calm my nerves. I hadn't seen Emma in years, and I wasn't sure what to expect. We had grown apart, our lives taking different paths after our parents' tragic accident. While I chose to stay close to home, helping our great-aunt and soaking in the local community, Emma moved to the city. She often said it was to chase bigger dreams. Not long after, I heard the door open again. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The perfume was unmistakably Emma's, sharp and assertive. "You're late, Clara," she said with a hint of annoyance. I turned to face her, noting how she hadn't changed much. She still had that assertive walk and a look that often sized people up within seconds. "I'm on time. You're early," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. She smirked. "Always trying to play the good girl, aren't you?" Ignoring her comment, I took a seat. The room felt colder with her in it. I looked at the lawyer's desk and then back at Emma, who was busy scrolling on her phone, her long fingers moving swiftly over the screen. "Can we get this over with?" Emma asked, not lifting her eyes from her device. "I have a flight to catch." Mr. Dawson entered just then, wearing his usual black suit. "Good morning, ladies. I see you both are eager to get started. If you could both take a seat?" "I've been seated," I said. Emma finally looked up from her phone and shot me a quick glance. "Let's just get to it." Mr. Dawson nodded and opened the will. "Very well. I'll read the details, and then we can discuss the division." I tried to focus on his words, but couldn't help but feel the weight of the room, the tension between Emma and me, and the importance of our great-aunt's final wishes. Mr. Dawson cleared his throat, drawing my attention back to the heavy document he held in his hands. "Now, as for the division of the estate..." Emma leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a mix of curiosity and greed. "Yes, let's hear it. I have meetings lined up this afternoon." I took a deep breath, trying to still the anxiety bubbling up. I didn't care much about the inheritance, but I cared about what it might do to an already fractured relationship. "Your great-aunt," Mr. Dawson began, "has left behind two primary assets. Firstly, a sum of $200,000, and secondly, the family house, along with all its contents." Emma raised an eyebrow. "I never took her for someone who saved money. Always thought she was a bit off, especially with all those trips to old bookstores." I felt my face heat up. "Emma, she was our family. You could at least show some respect." Emma just waved me off. "Oh, please, Clara. You and I both know she was eccentric. Everyone in town thought so." Mr. Dawson intervened. "Ladies, can we please focus on the matter at hand? You'll need to decide who takes what." "Obviously, I want the money," Emma declared without hesitation. I paused. Truthfully, I could use the money too, but the thought of selling our family house, filled with so many memories, was heartbreaking. "Maybe I want the money too," I countered, my voice shaking slightly. Emma laughed. "Oh, Clara, what will you do with that kind of money here in the middle of nowhere?" Before I could reply, Mr. Dawson chimed in. "The house is in good condition, especially for its age. It has quite some value." Emma's interest was immediately piqued. "Is that so? Maybe I should take a look at it then. I work in real estate after all." I felt a pang of worry. If Emma decided she wanted the house after all, I wasn't sure I had the strength to fight her for it. As Emma mulled over her options, Mr. Dawson leaned over, pulling out an envelope from his drawer and handing it discreetly to me. "Your great-aunt wanted you to have this," he whispered so that only I could hear. Written on the envelope were two words, "Yellow Room." Curious, I tucked the envelope into my bag, deciding to look at it later when I was alone. Emma, seemingly having made up her mind, announced, "All right, let's go see this house. But I'm warning you, Clara, if it's not up to standard, I'm taking the money." I nodded. "All right, let's go." The drive to the old family house felt longer than I remembered. Trees seemed to stretch endlessly on both sides of the road, occasionally giving way to open fields. There was something comforting about this familiar journey, even if the circumstances were anything but. Emma drummed her fingers on the steering wheel impatiently. It's been ages since I came down this road. I had forgotten how much I hated it. Why did you hate it? I asked, genuinely curious. This place was always too quiet, too slow for me. I always felt like a bird trapped in a cage. Remember how I always talked about leaving? I nodded. Yeah, but I never thought you actually would. Emma scoffed. Of course I would. There's a whole world out there. But look at you, still stuck in this town, living the same life day in, day out. I looked out the window. It's home, Emma. It's where we grew up, where our parents and great-aunt lived and loved. She just shook her head, clearly not understanding. We soon reached the driveway leading to the house. The gravel crunched under the tires as we made our way up. It was a large two-story structure, slightly worn from the years, but still standing strong. The garden had overgrown, with weeds taking over the flower beds, but the house still held a certain charm. Emma parked the car and looked at the house skeptically. This is it? Looks like a dump. It's an old house, I defended. It just needs a bit of love. She smirked. Well, you would know all about that, wouldn't you? Ignoring her jab, I headed towards the front door, key in hand. As I turned the lock and pushed the door open, memories flooded back. The scent of fresh cookies baking, the sound of our great-aunt's laughter, the feel of the carpet under my feet as I played with my toys. Emma walked in, surveying the rooms critically. This place is going to need a lot of work if it's going to sell for a decent price. I thought you wanted the money, I asked, trying to hide my relief. She shrugged. I did, but if this place is worth as much as that lawyer thinks, maybe I should reconsider. My heart sank. But you don't even like this place. Why would you want it? Emma rolled her eyes. Clara, wake up. It's not about liking it. It's about what it's worth. But it's our family home, I protested. She sighed, exasperated. You always were the sentimental one. Look, I'll think about it. Let's just get this over with. We toured the house, with Emma pointing out all the repairs and upgrades that would be needed. Every comment felt like a dagger in my heart. This wasn't just a house. It was a treasure trove of memories. Finally, we reached the second floor. I hesitated outside the door of the yellow room. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of the bookshelves inside. Emma pushed past me and entered the room. She looked around, her face scrunching up in confusion. What's so special about this place? It's just a bunch of old books. I didn't answer, my thoughts consumed by the envelope in my bag. Emma seemed to have made up her mind. All right, Clara, you can have the house. I'll take the money. I looked at her, surprised. Are you sure? She rolled her eyes. Yes, I'm sure. I don't have time for all this work. Besides, the house suits you. The next day, I decided to fully explore the house. Without Emma's impatient sighs and sarcastic remarks, it felt like I was truly home. Every corner held a memory. Every room whispered tales of our past. I opened the old wooden cabinets, smiling as I found our great-aunt's china set, still intact. I remembered the stern look she'd give us whenever we used them, warning us to be careful. These have been in the family for generations, she'd say. Sitting at the old dining table, I remembered our meals together. Do you remember the time Emma tried to cook? I whispered to the empty room, chuckling. She had been so determined to make a surprise dinner and had ended up burning everything. But we had laughed and eaten burnt spaghetti, declaring it the best meal ever. Going upstairs, I visited each bedroom. Our parents' room still had their scent, a mix of Dad's cologne and Mom's perfume. Finally, I reached the yellow room. The room our great-aunt had turned into a personal library. The sunlight streamed in, giving the room a soft glow. I ran my fingers over the spines of the books, each one telling not just its own story, but a bit of ours as well. Picking up a random book, I opened it and found a note scribbled in our great-aunt's handwriting. For Clara, when you're old enough to appreciate the beauty of words. I smiled, tears forming in my eyes. She had always said I had a love for stories. I remembered the nights she'd read to us. We'd sit, wrapped in blankets, hanging on to her every word. Sometimes, if we were lucky, she'd tell us tales of her own youth, stories not found in any book. Curiosity piqued, I searched the room for more notes. And there it was, another note inside a thick, leather-bound book. To Emma, remember to find joy in the little things. I was startled by a knock on the front door. Wiping away my tears, I headed downstairs. Opening the door, I found Mrs. Green, our old neighbor. "Oh, Clara!" she exclaimed. "I saw you come by yesterday. Thought I'd come and say hello." "Mrs. Green, it's been ages," I said, pulling her into a warm hug. She smiled. "How's Emma?" She's Emma," I replied, not knowing how else to describe the complex relationship we had. Mrs. Green chuckled. "You two always were like chalk and cheese, but deep down, I know she cares for you." I nodded, hoping that was true. After some tea and more reminiscing, Mrs. Green left, leaving me with a feeling of warmth and gratitude. Weeks turned into months. I grew more and more accustomed to the house and the comfort it provided. The yellow room became my refuge. Every evening after work, I'd sit in there, poring over the books. It wasn't just a hobby, it felt like a purpose. My great-aunt's collection was vast, and I believed there had to be more to it than just reading pleasure. One evening, while leafing through an old history book, I stumbled upon a folded paper tucked between its pages. Unfolding it, I found a list of book titles, some of which sounded familiar. Scribbled next to each title were numbers, possibly prices or maybe codes. My heart raced. Could this be a clue? The next day, with the list in hand, I visited a local bookstore to seek some guidance. Mr. Roberts, the owner, was a friend of my great-aunt's. "Mr. Roberts," I began, showing him the list, "do you recognize any of these titles?" He peered at the list, adjusting his glasses. "Well, Clara, some of these books are indeed rare. They'd fetch a good price if in decent condition. Your great-aunt and I used to discuss these. She had quite the collection." I beamed. "So, they're valuable?" "Yes," he replied, "very. Especially if they are first editions or have some sort of historical significance. But remember, their worth isn't just monetary. They hold knowledge, stories, and history." Over the next few weeks, with Mr. Roberts' help, I began cataloging the books, verifying their editions, and checking their potential value. The results were astounding. Many of the books were first editions, and some even had handwritten notes by authors. One day, as I was cataloging a book on ancient civilizations, a small envelope fell out. It was addressed to me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter from my great-aunt. "Dear Clara," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've delved deep into my collection. I always knew your curiosity would lead you here. These books are my legacy to you, not just in monetary value, but in knowledge. I hope they serve you well." Tears filled my eyes. My great-aunt had planned this all along. It wasn't about the money. It was about the journey, the search for knowledge, the legacy. Feeling a sense of responsibility, I decided to restore and preserve the books. The idea of opening a bookstore began to form in my mind, a place where others could cherish these works as much as my great-aunt did. One evening, as I was engrossed in my plans, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. "Hey, heard you found something valuable in that old house. Don't think this changes anything." I sighed. Emma still saw everything in terms of money. I typed back, "It's not about the money, Em. It's about preserving a legacy." The transformation of the ground floor of my great-aunt's house into legacy books was nothing short of magical. It was more than just a business. It was a reflection of my past and my dreams for the future. As word spread, more and more people began to visit. Schools arranged trips, and local book clubs made it their meeting point. One day, a popular Instagram blogger dropped by and gave us a shout-out. The popularity of legacy books skyrocketed. Late one evening, as I was winding down, my phone buzzed. It was a call from Emma. We hadn't spoken since our unpleasant encounter after the will reading. I hesitated but answered, "Hello?" "Clara," Emma's voice dripped with sarcasm. "I've been seeing your little project all over social media. Quite the success story, aren't you?" Taken aback, I replied, Yes, Emma. The bookstore is doing well. What do you want? I want what's rightfully mine, she snapped. You owe me, Clara. Owe you? I took what was left to me in the will, and I made the most of it. That's it. She scoffed. Of course, playing the innocent card. Well, here's the deal. You're going to give me some of that money you're making. Why would I do that? Because, her voice turned cold, if you don't, things are going to get very uncomfortable for you. You've got a reputation now, and it'd be a shame if something were to tarnish that. I felt a rush of anger. Are you threatening me? She laughed, but it was devoid of any warmth. Consider it a friendly advice. Think about it. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, processing the conversation. The audacity of Emma's demand was shocking. Threatening me over something I had worked so hard for felt like the ultimate betrayal. The next day, I met with Mr. Roberts and told him about the call. He listened quietly and then said, I suggest you be careful, Clara. But remember, you've earned every bit of your success. Don't let anyone take that away from you. I nodded, determination filling me. I won't. No matter what Emma says or does, I won't let her destroy what I've built. Mr. Roberts patted my hand. That's the spirit. And if you ever need any help, you know where to find me. Thank you, I replied, feeling grateful for the unwavering support. The clock struck midnight, and I was still at Legacy Books, reorganizing a new shipment that had come in earlier. I decided to take a short break, heading to the back to make myself some tea. Suddenly, the fire alarm blared. Panic surged through me. I ran towards the main floor, and thick black smoke filled the air, making it hard to see or breathe. I coughed, covering my mouth with my arm. I stumbled my way to the front door, forcing it open, and fresh air met my lungs. I looked back, and flames were consuming my beloved bookstore. I called 911, my hands shaking. Minutes felt like hours as I watched the firefighters battle the blaze. A small crowd had gathered, offering me comfort and water. As the fire was brought under control, a sinking feeling took hold. Was this Emma's doing? The next morning, a fire investigator named Mr. Dawson approached me. Miss Clara, he began, we suspect this fire was no accident. It seems to have been started intentionally. My heart raced. Do you have any idea who might be behind this? He looked at me with sympathetic eyes. We found traces of accelerant. We'll be looking into it. Do you have anyone in mind who would do this? I hesitated, but then decided to tell him about Emma and her threats. He nodded, taking notes. We'll look into it. In the meantime, be cautious. Days later, Mr. Dawson contacted me with news. We went through some security footage from a nearby building, he said. We saw someone leave the scene moments before the fire started. We have a suspect in custody. Is it Emma? I asked. He paused. It was a man. We believe he was hired. We're trying to find out who paid him. I felt anger rise in me. I have a pretty good idea. The next evening, I got a call from Emma. Heard about your little accident, she sneered. Such a tragedy. I know it was you, I shot back. She laughed. Prove it. I will, I said with determination. You'll regret ever crossing me. Emma huffed. You think you're so tough, but remember, I can always find another way to hurt you. Is that another threat? I asked. Just a fact, she replied before hanging up. One day, Mr. Dawson called. We got a lead, he said. The man we have in custody started talking. He named Emma as the person who hired him. I smiled, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. What happens next? We have enough to arrest her, he confirmed. The next time I saw Emma, she was in handcuffs, her defiant look replaced with one of fear. The courtroom was abuzz with low conversations and the shuffle of papers as I made my way inside. Finding a quiet corner, I took my seat, trying to compose the emotions swirling inside me. As Emma was brought in, she seemed a mere shadow of her former self. The arrogance, once so evident in her posture and demeanor, was replaced with a downtrodden, subdued look. Her eyes darted around nervously, avoiding mine when they briefly met. When the evidence was presented, it was clear. Emma had willingly and deliberately committed her crimes, driven by an overwhelming greed. Her actions were indefensible. The judge's final declaration resonated in the room. Emma Turner, you are hereby sentenced to 10 years in prison and are required to pay a fine of $500,000. I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Was this the sister I grew up with? The one who shared secrets, dreams, and childhood memories with me? It was evident now that her desire for money had overshadowed any love or kinship. After the trial, as people began to leave the courtroom, Emma turned to look at me one last time. She was led away, and I remained seated, processing the weight of the events. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my work. Legacy books became my sanctuary. Friends, both old and new, became my pillars of strength. Lucy, in particular, was always there, offering words of encouragement or just sharing a cup of coffee during quiet moments. As weeks turned into months, the store flourished. One evening, while organizing some books, Lucy asked, "What's next for you?" "I want to grow," I replied, looking around the store. "Not just here, but personally. I want to explore, learn, and experience more of what life has to offer." She smiled. "I'm sure you'll do great things, and I'll be here, cheering you on." The past held painful memories, but the future beckoned with promise. I had faced betrayal at its worst, but it had only made me stronger. As kids, everyone believed families were safe havens. But growing up, I realized that might not be the case for everyone, especially not for me. Our small suburban house was always filled with laughter and chatter, but not always the good kind. Our living room was a cozy space with mismatched cushions, a worn-out rug, and walls covered with photos, mostly of Clara. Clara with a trophy, Clara on her first day of school, Clara in her dance costume. There were some of me, of course, mostly hidden behind the vase, or partly obscured by another brighter, shinier photo of Clara. One afternoon, as I was rearranging the living room, Mrs. Henderson, our next-door neighbor and my mother's longtime friend, came over. A warm aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the air, her standard visiting treat. "Margaret," she greeted, enveloping my mother in a hug. "How are the girls?" Before my mother could reply, I stepped forward, offering a tray of lemonade. "Hello, Mrs. Henderson?" She looked up, a little surprised, as if noticing me for the first time. "Oh, Evelyn, my, you've grown!" "Just a little," I responded, attempting a smile. My mother chimed in. "Wait till you see Clara. She's become quite the young lady." On cue, Clara danced into the room, her blonde hair bouncing with every step. "Auntie Jen." She wrapped Mrs. Henderson in a tight hug. Mrs. Henderson chuckled, holding Clara at arm's length. "Look at you! Margaret wasn't kidding. You're blossoming so beautifully." Clara beamed, twirling for effect. The conversation flowed easily after that, Clara narrating her recent school achievements and dance recitals. At some point, I tried to join the conversation, mentioning a recent school project. My mother brushed it off. "That's nice, dear," and immediately redirected the topic back to Clara's accomplishments. I could feel a familiar sinking feeling in my chest, the need to be seen, to be recognized. As the afternoon sun streamed into the room, casting shadows, I overheard my mother's soft voice. Evelyn was just a test case for Clara. Mrs. Henderson frowned. "Margaret, that's a harsh thing to say. They're both your daughters." Clara looked between the two adults, confusion clouding her bright eyes. "I just mean," my mother tried to explain, "that with Clara, everything was easier. She was planned." I felt a lump forming in my throat, the weight of being the unplanned child pressing down on me. Mrs. Henderson, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. "Both your girls are special, Margaret. Don't forget that." Clara piped up, her innocence shining through. "Mommy, does this mean you love me more than Evie?" My mother hesitated, then replied with a gentle squeeze on Clara's hand. "Both of you are loved, just differently." Hearing those words, I retreated to my room. The sting of their implications burrowed deep, forming scars that would last a lifetime. Juggling between university lectures and 2 part-time jobs was not how most people envisioned their college experience. For me, every morning began at dawn, serving customers at the local cafe, filling them up with their morning dose of caffeine. Afternoons were all about classes and group projects, and by evening, I was surrounded by a sea of books at the local bookstore where I worked the second shift. I'd often come home late, exhausted, only to find Clara lounging in the living room, engrossed in one of her new hobbies, her art supplies strewn everywhere. Our family dynamics had always been clear. Clara was the star, and I was the backdrop. One evening, as we all gathered around the dinner table, a rare occurrence with our conflicting schedules, I mustered the courage to discuss a decision I had been contemplating for weeks. "Mom, Dad, I've been thinking about renting a place closer to the university," I began hesitantly, eyes darting between my parents and Clara. My statement was met with stunned silence. Then Dad's chuckle broke the quiet. "Renting? On a barista's and a bookstore clerk's wage?" Clara snickered. "Planning on living in a cardboard box, are we?" Ignoring her jibe, I turned to Mom, hoping for some support. "I've saved up, and with careful budgeting, I think I can manage." Mom put down her fork, her expression skeptical. "Evie, you're barely managing to pay us for staying here. Do you think landlords will be as forgiving as we are?" "It's not about what's easy," I responded, my voice quivering slightly. "It's about learning to stand on my own feet." Clara leaned in, smirking. Big words for someone who's been leaning on us all her life. Fed up, I retorted, "Maybe it's time you learned a thing or two about hard work and responsibility, Clara." She rolled her eyes, clearly uninterested in my lecture, while Mom interjected, "Girls, enough. Evie, we just don't want to see you struggle unnecessarily." "I appreciate that, Mom," I replied softly, "but sometimes struggle is necessary for growth." The days that followed were filled with whispered conversations behind closed doors and Clara's occasional jabs. Yet, my resolve remained unwavering. A week later, with bags packed, I moved into a modest, slightly worn-out studio apartment near my university. The independence was both daunting and exhilarating. While the family home, with its comfort and familiarity, was just a few blocks away, the emotional distance felt like miles. It was clear that my decision had not only changed my living situation, but also redefined my relationship with my family. The distant city lights shimmered through the curtains of my apartment, their soft glow contrasting the dark room. Engrossed in a particularly demanding case file, I was carefully making notes when my phone's unexpected ringing snapped me out of my concentration. I saw Clara's name on the screen and felt a pang of unease. Our last interaction had been months ago, and it hadn't been pleasant. Taking a deep breath, I swiped to answer. "Clara?" There was a pause, so unusual for my normally outspoken sister. Then, with an icy detachment, she said, "Dad's gone." For a moment, the words didn't register. "What do you mean, gone?" I stammered. She exhaled loudly. "Heart attack. It was unexpected. The doctors did everything, but—" I could feel a weight pressing on my chest. "I can't believe it. How's Mom?" Clara's tone, cold and almost businesslike, gave away no emotion. Distraught, as you can imagine. She's not speaking, not eating, just sitting there in the living room, staring at his favorite chair. I tried to visualize the scene, our childhood home filled with sorrow. The house which had seen so many memories, so many highs and lows, and now this. "And what about you?" I asked, trying to gauge her emotions. "How are you handling it?" There was a brief moment of vulnerability in her voice. "I'm coping, but this isn't about me." Before I could ask her what she meant, Clara launched into her main agenda. "Listen, I've got commitments, a busy work schedule, and my social life. I can't be there all the time. You need to come home and take care of things. And more importantly, Mom." The audacity of her demand infuriated me. "She's our mother, Clara, not a responsibility to be tossed around because you're too busy with your commitments." Clara hissed back. "You've always loved playing the responsible older sister, haven't you? Here's your chance. I've been there for them while you were busy building your career. Now, it's your turn." Every fiber of my being wanted to lash out at her selfishness, but I paused. Now was not the time for sibling rivalry. "All right," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll come home, but not because you ordered me to. Mom needs support, and I'll be there for her." She responded with a sarcastic cheerfulness. "Perfect. Glad you're seeing sense. Come quickly, won't you?" The line went dead, and I sat there, reeling. The loss of my father and the task ahead weighed heavily on me, but I was determined to step up. For Mom's sake, coming back home was like stepping into a different world. The once warm and lively house now felt cold and empty. Though I'd prepared myself mentally, nothing could have truly readied me for the stark change. Mom, usually the backbone of our family, looked frail and diminished. Her once sparkling eyes were now dull with grief. She barely acknowledged my arrival, lost in her own world of pain. But Clara, on the other hand, was as vocal as ever. "You finally decided to grace us with your presence," Clara remarked, her voice dripping with sarcasm as I entered the living room. Ignoring her jibe, I approached Mom, gently touching her arm. "Mom, I'm here now. We'll get through this together." She just nodded, her gaze distant. That evening, as I prepared dinner, I could hear Clara and Mom conversing in hushed tones in the adjacent room. Words like selfish, irresponsible, and career reached my ears. While I couldn't make out the entirety of the conversation, the undertones were clear. My absence during the past few years was a prime topic of discussion. At the dinner table, the atmosphere was tense. Every bite, every sip was filled with unspoken grievances. I mustered the courage to break the silence. "Mom, I know I haven't been around as much as I should have, but I'm here now, and I promise to be here for you." Mom, taking a deep breath, replied, "Evelyn, it's not about now. It's about all those years when you chose your work over us. I needed you then, and Clara was the one who was always by my side." Clara, smirking, added, "Some of us chose family over ambition." Stung by the accusations, I retorted, "I worked hard to provide for myself, to ensure I didn't burden you or Dad. And every time I offered help, it was declined. What did you expect me to do?" Clara scoffed, "Oh, please, play the victim somewhere else." The night wore on with heightened emotions and bitter words. The gap between the world I had built and the home I left behind had never felt wider. As I lay in my old bedroom that night, the weight of their expectations and the sting of their accusations weighed heavily on my heart. Returning home was proving to be more challenging than I'd anticipated. I had always been the dutiful daughter, the one who stepped up when others stepped back. From the moment I moved back into my parents' house, I took on the role of caregiver for my ailing mother. It wasn't an easy job, but it was the right thing to do. But no matter how much effort I put into making things comfortable for her, nothing ever seemed right. Every morning, I would make her favorite breakfast and try to engage her in conversation. But the response was always the same, a muttered complaint about the eggs being too runny or the toast too burnt. I would bite my tongue and nod, promising to do better next time. One evening, as I was cleaning the dishes, I overheard my mother speaking with Clara on the phone. "She just can't do anything right. I don't know why she even bothers." My mother's voice dripped with disdain. Clara, instead of defending me or even staying neutral, added fuel to the fire. "I told you, she's always been this way. You should have just let me handle things." It was heart-wrenching. Here I was, trying my absolute best, sacrificing my personal space, time, and mental well-being, only to be talked about like I was some kind of inconvenience. The whispers and gossiping became a regular occurrence, and every day it wore me down a little more. One particularly grueling day at work, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Clara's name flashed on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered, expecting another laundry list of things I had supposedly done wrong. In a tone colder than I'd ever heard, she snapped, "You need to leave. Mom can't stand you being there. You're making everything worse." My heart raced, and for a moment, I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. But then, a spark of anger and defiance ignited within. I was tired of always being the problem, the scapegoat. I responded, my voice firm, "Fine, I'll leave. But I'm taking my things with me." There was a pause, and I could imagine Clara's smug expression shifting to one of surprise. She probably expected me to beg, to apologize, to promise to be better. But those days were over. I was done being the family's invisible, taken-for-granted workhorse. The line went dead, and I took a moment to let it all sink in. It was time to reclaim my life and stop letting others define my worth. The morning sun broke through the blinds, casting warm rays over the living room. It illuminated the flat-screen TV, the couch, and the dining table, all reminders of years of hard work and sacrifice. Today, they became symbols of liberation. I methodically went from room to room. In the kitchen, I unplugged the fridge and microwave, each one a testament to those months I'd skipped outings with friends to save up. There was the coffee machine, my solace on many groggy mornings. The house echoed with memories, some sweet, some bitter, but the bitterness had started to overshadow everything else. My bedroom was next. I remembered buying the bed, picking out the sheets, arranging and rearranging the furniture until everything felt just right. I glanced at the vanity, a gift from my grandmother. It would stay. It wasn't about value, but principle. Just as I was taping up the last box, my phone buzzed to life, breaking the thick silence of the room. I knew who it was even before I checked. Clara's tone had been all sweet talk lately, but the underlying hostility was hard to miss. "You absolute thief!" The venom in her voice was palpable. Calmly, I replied, "Clara, everything I'm taking was bought with my money. I thought you'd be glad to see them go." "You can't just take everything from our family home," she shot back, her voice shrill. I sighed. It's funny how these things suddenly became family items. When I needed some support or a thank you, they were just things. Now that I'm reclaiming them, they're family heirlooms? I could practically see Clara's face turning red with fury. "You're ruining everything, just because of your stupid ego." I laughed, a sound filled with irony and bitterness. "Ego? Clara, if this was about ego, I would have left ages ago. This is about respect, value, and standing up for myself." A scoff came through the line. "Always the martyr, huh? Just return everything and maybe we can talk." Let's be clear. I have receipts for all these items, proof that they're mine. Every dime, every cent went from my pocket. Maybe you should have thought about that before you pushed me away. My voice was steady, but the rage and hurt underpinning it was undeniable. A heavy pause settled between us, thick with unsaid words and emotions. Finally, Clara hissed, "You always have to have the last word, don't you?" "It's not about having the last word," I replied, feeling the weight of years of suppressed feelings pressing down on me. "It's about finally speaking up." With that, I hung up, cutting off any further arguments. The boxes were loaded, the past was behind, and a future, uncertain yet hopeful, awaited. Months had passed since I severed ties with my family, and in that time, I blossomed. My confidence grew stronger each day, and I carved out a life for myself where I was in control and unyielding. My phone remained silent, my family's number blocked, and for the first time in years, I felt true freedom. The next time I saw my family was at my mother's funeral. Dressed in black, I stood apart, an outsider looking in, watching the play of my own family's drama. The air was thick with tension and unsaid words. Everyone seemed to be moving in slow motion, their faces a blur, their words just background noise. The reading of the will was held in the family attorney's chamber. Even though I had no interest in the inheritance, the town's gossip mill ensured I was well informed. Clara was, predictably, the sole beneficiary of everything. But what neither of us had anticipated was the mountain of debt our parents had left behind. The house, with its memories both bitter and sweet, was quickly sold. But even its sale didn't dent the colossal debt that loomed. I watched Clara's face turn from smug satisfaction to pale horror as the attorney listed out every debt, every mortgage, every unpaid bill. I caught snippets of hushed conversations between relatives. Bankruptcy? How did it come to this? Poor Clara, their voices dripping with a mix of pity and schadenfreude. While I felt a pang for the old house, I couldn't deny the grim satisfaction that welled up in me as I saw Clara grappling with this unexpected turn of events. For years, she had reveled in the security and comfort our parents provided, while belittling my every effort to stand on my own. Now, the tables had turned, and life had handed her its own brand of poetic justice. I left the funeral and the reading of the will without a backward glance. The whispers of the town didn't matter, nor did Clara's newfound troubles. I had my life, built brick by brick on my own terms, and nothing was going to shake that foundation. 2 years had swiftly passed since I'd separated from my family. The small apartment I'd initially settled into became too confining as my professional life flourished. Every day, I would catch glimpses of luxurious homes in magazines or on my way to work, and I couldn't help but think about buying my own. With my growing earnings, the idea seemed less of a dream and more of a tangible goal. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I was mindlessly scrolling through my social media when a familiar name popped up on my feed. There was Clara, surrounded by boxes and looking frazzled in front of our old family home. The caption read, "New Beginnings." A couple of mutual friends had commented words of sympathy. It didn't take much digging to figure out she had drowned herself in debt and was forced to put the house up for sale. I was midway through a call with my realtor about a lovely little house in the suburbs when my phone beeped with an incoming call. Clara's name flashed on the screen. Taking a deep breath, I answered. "Hello?" "Long time," Clara's voice came through, laden with fake cheer. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I asked, wary. "I need your help," she began. A heavy pause. "I need money." I raised an eyebrow. "We haven't spoken in years, and the first thing you ask for is money?" "We're sisters," she exclaimed, frustration evident. "That didn't seem to matter when you kicked me out," I remarked coldly. "I wouldn't be asking if I had another option," she snapped. "The house needs to be sold, and no one's buying. I'm drowning here." A silence stretched between us. My thoughts raced. "I'm not giving you money," I finally said, voice unwavering. "But I'll offer you a deal." Clara exhaled audibly, waiting. "I'll buy the house, but not at market price, at the minimum you owe. Take it or leave it." Her response was a soft, defeated, "Fine." The following weeks were a blur of paperwork, bank visits, and meetings. The day I received the keys to my childhood home was bittersweet. There was no triumphant return or a celebration, just a silent acknowledgement of all that had transpired. The house, once a symbol of fractured relationships and painful memories, now stood as a testament to my resilience and determination. As I set about making it my own, memories of the past were replaced by plans for the future. There were no more calls or messages from Clara. Our paths had diverged, and perhaps it was for the best. In the ancestral house, now mine, I built my sanctuary. The echoes of laughter and love soon filled its hallways, drowning out the whispers of the past. Forging ahead, my way, on my terms.